Welcome to PM Ready, your guide to becoming PMP certified. This is the lesson on executing, monitoring, and controlling cost. This lesson provides an overview of the inputs, outputs, tools, and techniques, or ITTOs, of executing, monitoring, and controlling cost. Included in these tools, we provide an introduction to earned value analysis, specifically for cost control, as well as variance analysis, trend analysis, reserve analysis, and forecasting of costs. As you can see from this table of cost management processes, there's only one cost management process that's in the monitoring and controlling process group, and that is the process known as control costs. Notice that as with scope management and schedule management, cost management doesn't have an executing process. This is because the direct and manage project work process, which is part of the integration knowledge area, is the process that handles the executing process for scope, schedule, and cost combined. Control costs will also need to interface and integrate with the monitor and control project work process, which is also part of the integration knowledge area. The control costs process has just two primary outputs. They are cost forecasts and work performance information supporting those cost forecasts. There are some secondary outputs, but we'll come to those later. The control costs process monitors cost performance and work performance, meaning that you measure actual work done and actual costs incurred and compare these to the planned amount of work to be done and the planned amount of money to be spent on the work done. You should investigate the variances to understand what's causing them, using techniques such as root cause analysis to get to the bottom of why costs are different from what was planned. And once you know that, you need to figure out ways to prevent additional cost overruns and to bring your expected costs back within the project's acceptable limits or tolerances. And you shouldn't just wait until something goes wrong. You should proactively identify and seek to influence those factors that cause cost variances. And that includes not only preventing cost overruns, but also taking advantage of opportunities to reduce costs. Control costs is the process that monitors expenditures to make sure they don't exceed their budgets. And it's not enough to keep an eye on just the overall project budget. That doesn't provide enough warning. You need to measure actual costs and compare them to planned costs at all levels, from the project level down to deliverables, control points or control accounts, and even individual work packages and activities. The control costs process is also where you ensure that all change requests are acted on in a timely manner, interfacing with the monitor and control project work process and the perform integrated change control process to have change requests evaluated, reviewed, and either approved or rejected. If approved, the control costs process ensures that the changes are carried out, and those changes need to follow your configuration management plan. Control costs also make sure that no unauthorized costs are charged to the project. In larger organizations, I've often seen cases in which people charge their time or costs to the wrong account, either to purposely hide or cover their expenses, or because they weren't sure where else to put their expenses, and they were under pressure to put them somewhere, or misunderstandings about what can and can't be charged to your project, or just honest mistakes. In addition, you need to make sure that any changes made that are not approved or any unauthorized work on your project, including and especially by your own project team, are not allowed to be charged to your project. You need to keep a close eye on these charges and stop and reverse them as soon as possible. When there are approved changes to the cost baseline, the control costs process is where you manage these changes. As with other approved cost-related changes, the control costs process needs to follow the configuration management plan to see these changes implemented. This will likely involve at least maintaining versions of all of the cost baselines and communicating these changes to stakeholders, as well as making this information readily available. Control costs also includes communicating all of this information to the appropriate stakeholders. Information such as the cost performance, cost forecasts, variances, causes of variances, change requests, approved change requests, preventive and corrective actions, and so on. The inputs to the control costs process start with work performance data, which comes from your direct and manage project work process. This data includes the status of your expenses, including which are authorized, which have been incurred, have they been recorded, and in the case of outside vendors, which have been invoiced and paid for. Next, you have the cost baseline, which is your plan for costs that you can compare your actual costs to, and your performance measurement baseline, which is a combination of scope, schedule, and cost baselines used by earned value analysis to measure both cost and schedule performance. Both of these baselines are used to measure variances and help determine what corrective, preventive, or other changes may be needed. Next, you have project funding requirements. This is your time-phased plan for when you'll be receiving project funding. This can be important to know if your project has cost variances that could affect the needed timing of funding. You also, of course, have your cost management plan because this includes your rules for how to manage and control costs. Also, your lessons learned register, which can include some lessons that you've learned so far on your project about how best to control costs, including preventive and corrective actions that you've taken and how well they've worked. And finally, some organizational process assets, such as your organization's policies and procedures and guidelines and other cost management tools that you can or should use, as well as the monitoring and reporting methods that you should be using. Let's review your project cost baseline and project budget. This time, let's do this going left to right using a top-down approach. Your total project budget includes two items, your cost baseline and the management reserve. Remember that the management reserve is that amount of money which has been set aside by management for the unknown unknowns, those risks that have not been identified and don't have response plans. And so this funding is for those surprises that you have not anticipated. And it's not included in your cost baseline, but is part of your overall project budget. Your cost baseline consists of a number of control accounts. These are specific points within your work breakdown structure at which you measure, using earned value analysis, your cost and schedule performance. These control accounts could be organized around phases or key deliverables or anything else that makes sense for your project. But it's below the level of the overall cost baseline, so you should have several control accounts in your cost baseline, and it's above the level of your work packages. So each control account should have 2 or more work packages as part of the control account. Each work package has its cost estimate and can have a contingency reserve set aside for the risks that have been identified or other uncertainties related to that work package. Each work package can consist of multiple activities, and each of those activities will have cost estimates, and each activity can also have its own contingency reserve for the risks and uncertainties of those activities. A few key points to remember from this diagram are that there's a difference between your contingency reserves that are for your identified risks and your management reserves, which you as a project manager do not have access to. You can't use the management reserve at your discretion. Management uses that. That your cost baseline is less than your project budget. That you have control accounts throughout your work breakdown structure for measuring performance. And that your contingency reserves can be assigned both at the activity level and at the work package level. At the top of the list of tools and techniques for the control costs process, we have expert judgment. This can involve experts in variance analysis and forecasting, but also in earned value analysis in particular. If you're not comfortable with earned value analysis, but there's someone in your organization, or perhaps even outside your organization, who is an expert, you can consult with them and get some help on setting up ways in which you can use earned value analysis on your project. This can be a little intimidating at first, but it can be a very valuable tool for measuring the progress and performance of your project. Next come several data analysis tools and techniques, including earned value analysis, variance analysis, trend analysis to see how your project is performing and whether performance is getting better or worse, and reserve analysis, which is simply taking a look at your contingency and management reserves frequently and seeing whether or not you still have enough or perhaps too much. We also have the To Complete Performance Index, which is part of your earned value analysis, which is used to measure how much more it's going to cost to finish the remaining work. And your project management information system can be a valuable tool, especially as it supports cost control and earned value analysis. Earned value analysis uses the performance measurement baseline, which is an integration of the scope, schedule, and cost baselines. It uses planned value, or PV, to represent the budget assigned to scheduled work. Traditionally, this has been referred to as the budgeted cost of work scheduled, or BCWS. Planned value is what you thought it would cost for what should have been completed by now. Earned value is the budget assigned to completed work. It has traditionally been referred to as the budgeted cost of work performed. It's what you thought it would cost to do what has been done so far. This is different from actual cost. Actual cost of work performed is what this used to be called, and it is what it has actually cost to do what has been done so far. Planned value, earned value, and actual cost are often graphed on an earned value analysis chart, such as this one, which is a time-phased graph that shows the planned value, earned value, and actual cost lines. Here you can see that it's in a typical S-curve, which is typical for a project. The blue line is the planned value. This is how much you've budgeted for the planned work, week by week in this case. Then the red line is the earned value line, which is the planned value of the amount of work that has actually been done. And then you have this orange line of actual cost, which shows how much it has actually cost to do the work that has been done so far. Earned value analysis is covered in much more depth in separate lessons, but here you can see that the earned value is less than the planned value, which tells you you're behind schedule. You haven't gotten as much done as you'd planned. And you can also see that the actual cost is greater than the earned value, which tells you that this project is also over budget. It's costing more to complete the work than you'd planned. Earned value analysis uses the following variance analysis measures. Schedule variance to show how far off schedule you are. Cost variance to show how far off you are on your budget. The schedule performance and cost performance indexes, which measure the same things in a ratio. And the variance at completion, which is a forecast of what the cost variance will be for the whole project. And the budget at completion, which is the total project budget, not including management reserves. Here we have an earned value analysis chart, similar to the previous one, which shows the planned value line pretty much down the middle here, and it shows the earned value line below it and the actual cost line above it. By comparing the planned value to the earned value, you can see the schedule variance. In this case, earned value is less than planned value, so we're behind schedule. The cost variance is not measured relative to planned value, but it's the difference between the actual cost and the earned value. And here you can see the actual cost is higher than the earned value of what you've done so far, so that tells you that you're also over budget. Here at the right, you can also see that the estimate at completion is higher than the budget at completion or project budget. The estimate at completion, abbreviated EAC, is the forecasted cost of your project, which is not the same as your approved budget, but rather what you think it's actually going to cost. The estimate to complete is the forecasted amount that you think it's going to cost to finish what's still remaining to be done. And the to complete performance index, or TCPI, is the level of cost performance that it would take to finish the project on budget. Looking back at this earned value analysis chart, you can see that the estimate to complete, or ETC, is marked here in red as the amount of money between what you've actually spent so far and what you think it's going to cost to finish the project. Notice that this goes all the way up to the estimate at completion, which is here on the right at the end of the dotted line, which forecasts the actual cost line all the way to the end of the project. Notice here that the estimate at completion is above the BAC, or budget at completion, which is the total amount of your project's cost baseline, not your total project, because the total project also includes your management reserve. The outputs of control costs include your cost forecasts and work performance information to support these cost forecasts. And you may also need to update your cost estimates and your basis of estimates. You may also need to update your cost baseline, your performance measurement baseline, or even your cost management plan. But these are going to be baselined items which can't be changed without a change request, which needs to go through the Perform Integrated Change Control process. In addition, you may need to update your assumption log, your risk register, and also your lessons learned register with information about what you've been doing to try and control costs and what's working and what's not. How much do you remember of the inputs, outputs, tools, and techniques of control costs? The main outputs are the cost forecasts and the work performance information supporting them. You may also need to change some things, and sometimes there'll be things that are baselined, so you'll need to issue change requests. Inputs are primarily your baselines and your actuals from your work performance data. You'll also have as inputs the rules from your cost management plan and lessons learned from your lessons learned register. And your time-phased project funding requirements. Your tools and techniques include expert judgment, data analysis techniques such as earned value analysis, variance analysis, trend analysis, and reserve analysis, some forecasting indexes such as the To-Complete Performance Index, and the tools in your project management information system. Agile approaches are for projects that have a high degree of uncertainty and embrace change, meaning that your costs may also change frequently. Although not unique to Agile, it's common to start off the project with high-level estimates and save the detailed cost calculations for short-term sprint or iteration planning. However, Agile approaches often use the concept of velocity instead of earned value analysis to forecast how long a project will take and how much it will cost. Done properly, velocity measurements can be an excellent forecasting tool. A few key things to remember from the lesson include that the cost baseline does not include the management reserves, that the key earned value measurements that are the foundation of earned value are planned value, which is the budgeted cost of the work scheduled to be done, earned value, which is the budgeted cost of the work performed so far, and actual cost, which is the actual cost of the work actually performed so far. And variance analysis tools such as CV and SV, which are your cost and schedule variance measured in dollars, and CPI and SPI, which are your cost and schedule performance indexes for forecasting, and these are measured as a ratio. For more information, you can refer to these pages of the PMBOK guide. PM Ready is a publication of PM Guaranteed and is based on the Project Management Institute's PMBOK guide.